So I strapped these $80 lenses onto my Sony A7 III camera earlier today, and I'm gonna go shooting. What's it like shooting street photography in manual focus? Most of all, were these lenses worth it? Let's find out. So these lenses are the Yashica 50mm f1.9 and the Yashica 135mm f2.8. For the life of me, I can never remember the names of these lenses. I just bought them because they were the cheapest thing on eBay. I did like the teeniest bit of research. All I know is that these lenses were made in the early 90s. They are Japanese, if you haven't figured that out. And then this thing here, that's the adapter for Sony, pushes it out a little bit further. There's just one thing though. They're completely manual lenses. No autofocus and no auto iris. In terms of the build of these lenses, they're both made out of metal. They both feel pretty solid. They're not too heavy. They're smaller than the Sony lenses these days. You get a nice click with your f-stop. I mean, this is a feature that you pay for on lenses in this day and age. You have nice, smooth focusing right here. Feels very good, very comfortable to focus. The telescoping's not too big. It does telescope. It's a little bit longer because of the adapter here. It comes off pretty easily. There's a little button on the adapter. You can pull it off. Here's the adapter, here's the lens. The 135 does feel a little bit longer. Definitely has that like vintage street photographer vibe, so I feel pretty good, pretty hip walking around with this thing. I don't think kids say hip these days. Anyway, it felt pretty good, and definitely if I switch it over to the 50, this 50mm lens, again, it's a little bit longer because of the adapter, but it feels pretty light, it's pretty comfortable. This definitely feels like I'm in like full street photography mode, and 50mm is a very popular length, the nifty 50, if you will. f1.9, kind of a weird f-stop, but pretty fast. Generally speaking, they fit very nicely on the Sony body. Just to give you guys a size comparison, here is my 35mm f1.4 Sony lens, and here is the 135mm here is my 35mm Sony f1.4. Here is my Yashica 135mm, and as you can see, there is quite a size difference between the two for prime lenses. Usually longer lenses are bigger, so that's pretty crazy. This does feel a little bit heavier actually than this. It's probably because this is made completely out of metal. And then just to show you guys another comparison, this is the 135 Yashica versus the 85mm. These are somewhat closer focal length, still smaller than the 85mm, definitely narrower than the 85mm. One thing I should definitely mention as well is that these are both full frame lenses. This is back from an era where full frame wasn't like a bonus feature, it's just what film cameras shot. So you're getting a full frame lens that will work on a full frame camera and an APS-C size camera. So here's what I think is the coolest part of today, and a lot of it had to do with the A7 III body and what the A7 III is capable of. Specifically, not to beat a horse to death, the low light functionality of the A7 III. Because of its ability to get such great pictures at high ISOs, I am the least scared of any camera I've ever had to set this to auto ISO. In terms of my settings for street photography, I wanted two options. I wanted a control option, and I wanted a like as close to automatic as I could get option. So for my control option, first off, everything's manual focus, duh, of course. Everything's manual iris, of course. I set it to automatic white balance across the board. I'm shooting raw only. I set it to like standard, not that it matters, but you get like the preview of what it would look like in standard on the screen. I find it pretty pleasing. I set the ISO to auto. I set the shutter to whatever I wanted the shutter to be, like around 500, 320, whatever. So for my manual mode, the only two things that I really had to change ever was focus and shutter. The even easier mode is to just set it to aperture priority. So at aperture priority with my ISO at auto, you don't even have to change the shutter. You don't really have to change the f-stop. Everything's kind of basically in automatic mode. You can use the little wheel on the top to over or underexpose. So really you're just focusing on focusing. The other two things that I found really helpful were focus peaking and the focus assist. I switched the focus peaking to be red, and I originally had it on like like its heaviest setting. I ended up setting it up on its medium setting. But what that does is when something's in focus, it puts like little crawly red ants around them, and it does work with the manual lens. I also found out that if you double tap on the back of the monitor, even though the touchscreen functionality is very limited on this camera, if you double tap, you zoom in as a focus assist. So you can tap on an area, zoom in, like digitally zoom in on it, like double or something like that, get your focus, double tap again, and pull back out. I ended up mapping one of my function buttons to the focus peaking because I found myself turning it on and off all the time. Sometimes I found it distracting and sometimes I found it helpful. What was my shooting experience like on this camera? Going out into a busy city and actually trying to do some street photography. Well, I was really excited and I mostly used the 135mm lens. And the first thing I can tell you is it's really difficult to be moving and shoot someone else that's moving in manual focus at 135mm. So I missed focus all the time. I found myself having to adjust. I found myself having to not move as much, to perch myself in a corner or sit on a bench or sit on in an area. But the nice thing is, because it's a longer lens, I could sort of spy a little bit more and get things that were further away and get some really interesting angles and subjects that I normally wouldn't get on my 35mm or my 50mm, because I'd have to be like right in their face to get those photos. I could also get some really cool pictures of like alleyways and buildings that looked more planar, or the buildings look bigger, or the streets look more compressed because of that longer focal length. So all of those things worked out really, really well. It's definitely much easier to sit, find a focus zone, maybe like off of a plant or something like that, and let people walk into the focus. The other thing that I did is I found myself switching back and forth between my regular shutter and my silent shutter. I really do like the silent shutter because I feel like if I hold the camera down like this with the screen flipped up and I have it on silent shutter, people don't notice that I'm taking photos with them as much, and I can just kind of peek down and take photos, and I can really catch people in naturalistic poses as opposed to all of a sudden seeing and being aware of a camera being on them. On the 50mm lens, I found focusing on things a lot easier. It's a much wider focal length. The focus peaking made it super easy. It's not my most exciting focal length. I know it's a very popular street photography length, but for whatever reason for me, I tend to like either really wide or really long lenses. The stuff in the middle is just not as exciting for me, so I didn't use it as much. I did shoot a little bit of video, mostly slow-mo. Again, focus is really hard on the longer lenses, but it's more like a cinematic experience when I shoot a short film or a movie and I do manual focus as opposed to a vlog where I'm trying to do autofocus. But it wasn't too bad. Again, I'd let people come into focus, I'd let people go out of focus. I do think there's a lot of nice B-roll. It's a very good B-roll lens, this 135mm lens. Yeah, so yeah, in terms of video, I would say neither of these two lenses would be great vlogging lenses. First off, you'd want something wider so you can point it at yourself and have to worry less about focus if you're doing manual focus. But also, yeah, just because of the focus and all the manualness of it, it's not so good at pointing it at yourself. I really do see myself using these lenses on short films and cool time lapses and slow-mo things in the future. I think the number one most surprising thing to me when I was shooting photos with these lenses was the character of these lenses. I didn't expect them to have such like a look, such a vibe to them. Even the 50mm, which was less exciting to me, when I started looking at the photos, I started realizing it's not actually that sharp a lens. It's sharp in the middle. It's kind of got this nice vignetting, softening on the edges. And you know, normally you pay a lot of money not to have that, but it's like a look that you'd spend a lot of time in Lightroom trying to replicate in this day and age, just comes free in the lens. And even with the 135, I just felt like the bokeh, the blurry creaminess behind it was really, really nice. And the colors, for whatever reason, just like took me back to shooting film back in the day. And I gotta be honest, I didn't do almost any color grading or manipulation to the photos that I'm showing you guys here. This is mostly how they came out of the bag, using the standard profile on RAWs. And I was kind of blown away with how interesting these lenses look. The 135 can get really sharp. You just have to like really find the area of sharpness. Oftentimes I was off just a little bit and things are a little softer than I want them to be. But man, the character, like it just felt really nice off of these lenses. I was really surprised for how cheap these lenses are, how good and interesting a quality of picture I could get. The A7 III pairs awesomely with these vintage lenses, more than I ever hoped or imagined for $80 worth of lenses. Is it worth it to get these lenses? Absolutely. The moral of this story is you do not need to spend a lot of money. You do not need to get the latest and greatest lens out there in order to make art. What you need more than anything is you. You need to practice. You need to get out there and do it. Money can't replace you and your creativity at all. Because so many people right now are seeing things on the new lenses, on the newest Zeiss or the newest Sony lens. Not too many people are seeing things on this lens. And so I bet you people are gonna be like, oh man, what'd you shoot that on? That looks so cool, that looks great. What filters did you use? Was that log 3 or HDR or what did you do? And the answer is just, no man, it's this lens I got on eBay for like 80 bucks. The bottom line is, it's all the flaws and imperfections that make these lenses great. It's all the flaws and imperfections that make us great, and it's the reason art exists, to show people an imitation of life and all of its flaws. I highly recommend these lenses. I highly recommend you go on the hunt for other lenses. And as a quick bonus, you know, having to shoot manual is gonna teach you a lot about camera that you may or may not know already. So it's a skill it's a muscle that you wanna develop too. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I've actually got some really cool adapters and things for these lenses that are coming in the mail that I'm gonna play with in the future. So stay tuned for the next video. See you guys later.